Dominic Foster had 3 rules for surviving on Starbase Nexus 7. Keep your head down, do your job, and never, under any circumstances, get involved in alien politics. As a maintenance technician on the largest multi-species installation in the Orion Arm, these rules had served him well for the past 4 years. Until today. The day had started normally enough. Dominic had been assigned to fix a ventilation issue in the lower decks, a simple job that should have taken 2 hours tops. But then his favorite microspanner went missing, and rather than requisition a new one, which would mean filling out 17 different forms in triplicate, he decided to track it down. "Last time I lent Jackson anything," Dominic muttered, crawling through a maintenance duct that, according to station schematics, should lead to the research wing where his fellow technician was working. The duct narrowed unexpectedly, forcing Dominic to wriggle forward on his elbows. His tool belt caught on something, and he cursed under his breath. As he reached back to free it, his hand brushed against what felt like a panel. There was a soft click, and suddenly the floor beneath him gave way. Dominic fell with a startled yelp, landing hard on a polished stone floor. Dazed, he looked up to find himself in a chamber he'd never seen before, one definitely not on any official station map. The room was circular, bathed in a soft purple light. Strange symbols covered the walls, pulsing with subtle energy. In the center stood a raised dais surrounded by 7 crystalline pillars, each emitting a low, harmonic hum. And standing on the dais, looking just as surprised as he felt, was a Xyrelian. Not just any Xyrelian, Dominic realized with growing horror, but Nistra, the daughter of High Counselor Thryax and one of the most important diplomatic figures on the station. Her pearlescent skin shimmered with bioluminescent patterns that shifted from surprise to what Dominic could only interpret as alarm. Behind her stood several other Xyrelians, all dressed in elaborate ceremonial attire, their expressions ranging from shocked to outraged. Dominic said eloquently, "Wrong turn." One of the older Xyrelians stepped forward, hissing something in their native tongue. The translator pinned to Dominic's uniform crackled to life, but only managed to catch fragments. "Sacred! Intruder! Binding ceremony." Nistra raised a 6-fingered hand, silencing the elder. Her large, faceted eyes studied Dominic with unsettling intensity. "Human," she said, her voice like chimes in the wind, "do you understand what you have done by entering this chamber?" Dominic slowly got to his feet, brushing dust from his uniform. "Look, I'm really sorry about this. I was just trying to find my missing tool and—" "You have interrupted the rite of Xalthorin," she interrupted, her bioluminescent patterns shifting to a deep blue. "A ceremony performed once every 100 cycles." Right, Dominic nodded desperately. "My bad, I'll just be on my way and let you get back to it." He turned to find the exit, but froze when he realized the panel he'd fallen through had sealed itself. There was no visible door anywhere in the chamber. "It is too late," Nistra said, her tone impossible to read. "The rite has been activated by your presence. The crystals have recognized your life signature." As if responding to her words, the 7 pillars surrounding the dais flared with brilliant light. Energy arced between them, forming a dome that briefly encased both Nistra and Dominic before dissipating in a shower of luminescent particles. The assembled Xyrelians gasped collectively. The elder who had spoken earlier fell to his knees, uttering what Dominic's translator identified as a traditional Xyrelian prayer. "What just happened?" Dominic asked, a growing sense of dread forming in the pit of his stomach. Nistra's patterns had shifted again, now pulsing with a combination of colors Dominic had never seen on a Xyrelian before. "The binding is complete," she said simply. "Binding? What binding?" A different Xyrelian stepped forward, taller than the others, with elaborate markings that Dominic vaguely recalled indicated high military rank. "The human must be removed," this new Xyrelian declared. "The ceremony is invalid. He is not of our kind." "The crystals have decided Zeklath," Nistra responded firmly. "You know our laws. The rite of Xalthorin cannot be undone once the binding occurs." Dominic looked between them, completely lost. "Could someone please explain what's going on?" Nistra turned to him, her expression softening slightly. "Human." Dominic Foster." "Dominic Foster," she repeated, the name sounding strangely melodic in her voice. "According to our most sacred traditions, we are now bound together in the eyes of Xalthorin. Bound like handcuffed. The elder Xyrelian rose from his knees, looking scandalized. It is a joining of souls, a sacred union that transcends physical form. Dominic stared blankly for a moment before understanding crashed over him like a wave of ice water. Wait, are you saying we're married? The word hung in the air between them. Nistra's patterns flickered in what might have been embarrassment. In your terminology, yes, she confirmed. According to the most sacred laws of the Xyrelian people, you and I are now lifemates. The chamber erupted into chaos as the assembled Xyrelians began talking all at once. Zeklath looked ready to commit murder, while the elder seemed to be having some sort of religious experience. Dominic's knees suddenly felt weak. He'd only wanted to find his missing microspanner. Instead, he'd somehow married one of the most important aliens on the station. Admiral Harlow was going to have him scrubbing plasma conduits for the rest of his natural life. There must be some way to undo this, he said desperately. Nistra shook her head, her patterns now a calm, resolute blue. The binding is permanent. You are now part of my house and lineage. She paused, studying him with those unsettling, faceted eyes. This is unexpected, but perhaps not entirely unwelcome. Before Dominic could respond, a hidden door slid open in the wall. 2 human security officers burst in, phasers drawn. Mr. Foster, said the lead officer, looking thoroughly confused to find a maintenance technician in a secret Xyrelian chamber. Admiral Harlow would like to speak with you immediately. Dominic swallowed hard. His first rule of survival on Nexus 7 had always been to keep his head down. So much for that plan. Admiral Harlow's office was a study in military precision. Not a datapad out of place, not a speck of dust on any surface. The man himself matched his surroundings, tall, immaculate, with steel-gray hair and a perpetual expression that suggested he was calculating the most efficient way to space you. Dominic stood at attention, trying not to fidget as the Admiral stared him down from behind his desk. So, Harlow said finally, his voice dangerously calm, you crawled through an unauthorized maintenance duct, fell into a classified Xyrelian chamber, and accidentally married the daughter of their High Counselor. That's accurate, sir. Do you have any idea what you've done, Foster? Before Dominic could answer, the office door slid open to admit a severe-looking woman in a diplomatic uniform. Ambassador Julia Fletcher strode in, data tablet in hand, looking like she hadn't slept in days. The Xyrelian delegation is demanding an official response, she announced without preamble. High Counselor Thryax is on his way to the station as we speak. Harlow pinched the bridge of his nose. Fantastic. Sir, I didn't mean to, Dominic began. Save it, Foster, Harlow cut him off. Intent is irrelevant. The fact is, you've created an interspecies incident during the most delicate negotiations we've had in decades. Ambassador Fletcher consulted her tablet. According to Xyrelian law, the binding ceremony is considered inviolable. Attempting to nullify it would be seen as a grave insult to their culture. So I'm actually married to her? Dominic asked, disbelief coloring his voice. Legally, yes, Fletcher confirmed. And Nistra wasn't just participating in any ceremony. She was undergoing the rite of Zalthorin to prepare for her ascension to the diplomatic High Council. Her union was meant to solidify an alliance between 2 powerful Xyrelian houses. Which you've now thoroughly disrupted, Harlow added pointedly. The office door slid open again, revealing Nistra herself, flanked by 2 Xyrelian attendants. Her skin rippled with patterns that Dominic couldn't begin to interpret. I request to speak with my life-mate, she announced, her musical voice somehow managing to sound both imperious and uncertain. Harlow rose from his seat. Your Excellency, we're currently discussing how to resolve this unfortunate. There is nothing to resolve, Admiral, Nistra interrupted. The binding is complete. What is done cannot be undone. She turned her faceted gaze to Dominic. I must speak with him alone. Harlow and Fletcher exchanged looks. 5 minutes, the Admiral conceded, motioning Fletcher to follow him out. When the door closed, leaving Dominic alone with Nistra and her silent attendants, an awkward silence fell between them. So Dominic said eventually, this is unexpected. Indeed, Nistra's patterns shifted to a softer hue. You should know that Zeklath has challenged the validity of our union. He was to be my intended match. I gathered that. He didn't seem thrilled about the interruption. He will seek to undo what has been done, she continued. My father arrives in 2 of your Earth days. Until then, you must learn our ways, quickly. Dominic ran a hand through his hair. Look, I'm just a maintenance tech. I fix things. I'm not cut out for interspecies politics. Nistra studied him, her head tilting slightly. Perhaps that is precisely why the crystals chose you. Before Dominic could ask what she meant, the door opened and Admiral Harlow returned. Time's up, he announced. Your Excellency, Ambassador Fletcher will escort you back to your quarters. As Nistra turned to leave, she reached out unexpectedly, her 6-fingered hand brushing against Dominic's wrist. A strange, tingling sensation traveled up his arm. Remember, she said softly, Zeklath will not accept defeat easily. With that cryptic warning, she was gone, leaving Dominic with a sinking feeling that his life had just become far more complicated than a missing microspanner warranted. This is a terrible idea, Dr. Octavia Reed said, adjusting her spectacles as she studied the ancient Zyrelian text displayed on her workstation. Dominic paced the length of her lab, unable to sit still. I didn't exactly volunteer for this, Doc. Dr. Reed was Nexus 7's leading xenoanthropologist, a brilliant if somewhat eccentric woman who had dedicated her life to studying alien cultures. Her lab was a chaotic collection of artifacts, specimens, and data terminals, all organized according to a system only she understood. The rite of Zalthorin isn't just a marriage ceremony, she explained, gesturing to the holographic display. It's a spiritual and political union meant to strengthen bloodlines and forge alliances. By interrupting it, you've essentially inserted yourself into Zyrelian politics at the highest level. Great, Dominic muttered, and Zeklath wants to kill me because... He doesn't just want to kill you. He wants to humiliate you first. Reed brought up another display showing a tall, imposing Zyrelian with military insignia. Commander Zeklath is from the warrior caste. His union with Nistra would have united the military and diplomatic houses for the first time in 7 generations. A soft chime interrupted them. Reed touched a panel, and a security feed appeared showing a corridor outside her lab. 2 Zyrelian guards were posted there. Nistra sent them, Reed explained, for your protection. From Zeklath. Among others, not everyone is happy about a human suddenly entering their sacred lineage. Dominic collapsed into a chair. What am I going to do? I don't know the first thing about being a Zyrelian, whatever I am now. Consort, Reed supplied helpfully, and you're going to learn fast. She tossed him a data pad. Start with these basic protocols, customs, taboos, memorize them. Dominic scrolled through the information, eyes widening. There are 57 different greeting gestures depending on time of day and social rank. And that's just the simplified version. Before Dominic could respond, the lab door slid open. A security officer stepped in, looking grim. Mr. Foster, there's been an incident. Someone tampered with the environmental controls in your quarters. If you'd gone back there as scheduled, you would have been exposed to nitrogen trifluoride. Which would have done what exactly? Dominic asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. Dissolved your lungs, Reed said bluntly. The security officer nodded. Admiral Harlow wants you moved to secure quarters immediately. As Dominic gathered his things, Reed placed a hand on his arm. Remember, Dominic, in Zyrelian culture, showing weakness is worse than death. Whatever happens, stand your ground. Great advice when someone's trying to dissolve my lungs, he replied dryly. The journey to his new quarters was tense, with security officers scanning every corridor before allowing him to proceed. As they rounded the final corner, Dominic spotted a familiar figure waiting by his door, Nistra. Her patterns pulsed with colors he couldn't interpret, but there was something in her stance that suggested concern. My life mate, she greeted him formally. I have come to ensure your safety. Thanks, apparently someone wants me dead. Zeklath has invoked the right of challenge, she said, her voice solemn. He claims our binding was invalid and demands the right to reclaim his position. The security officer beside Dominic stiffened. What does that mean exactly? Nistra's patterns darkened. It means he has challenged Dominic to Krellvorn ritual combat for the right to be my consort. Dominic felt the blood drain from his face. Combat, as in fighting, with weapons. Tomorrow at the rising of the second sun, Nistra confirmed. It is your right to choose the style of combat, but you cannot decline the challenge without forfeiting our union. And if I forfeit, then I must bind with Zeklath, Nistra said, her patterns briefly flashing a color that Dominic somehow knew represented distress. And you would not survive the shame ritual that follows. The security officer cleared his throat. I'll inform Admiral Harlow immediately. As the officer hurried away, Dominic and Nistra were left alone in the corridor. There's something you're not telling me, Dominic said, studying her alien features and finding them strangely easier to read than before. Nistra's patterns shifted to a color he'd never seen before. The binding between us, it is deeper than you know. We are beginning to sense each other's emotions, thoughts. That's why I knew you were worried just now. She nodded. The connection will grow stronger with time. She hesitated, then added, Zeklath knows this. It is why he moves so quickly. Once our binding is complete, it cannot be challenged. Dominic leaned against the wall, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on him. I'm not a fighter, Nistra. I fix things. That's all I've ever done. Nistra moved closer, her luminescent patterns casting soft light between them. Perhaps that is exactly what our peoples need, Dominic Foster, someone who fixes things. Somewhere deep in his mind, Dominic felt a flicker of emotion that wasn't his own, hope, tinged with something warmer. The bond between them, whatever it was growing stronger. And tomorrow, he would fight to protect it. The combat arena looked ancient despite being constructed just hours ago on Nexus 7's observation deck. Admiral Harlow had reluctantly approved the venue after lengthy negotiations with the Xyrelian delegation. The circular platform was surrounded by spectators, humans, Xyrelians, and representatives from a dozen other species, all drawn to the unprecedented spectacle. Sergeant Varrock, a grizzled Dendarian security officer with leathery gray skin and eyes that had seen too much combat, sized Dominic up with obvious skepticism. You've never fought before, the sergeant growled. I wrestled in high school, Dominic offered weakly. Varrock made a sound that might have been a laugh. Zeklath has killed 17 challengers in ritual combat. He will not be merciful. Encouraging, Dominic muttered. But Varrock continued, you have one advantage. As the challenged, you choose the combat style. Dominic had spent the night poring over Xyrelian combat traditions with Dr. Reed. None of them favored a maintenance technician with minimal combat training. What about engineering? He asked suddenly. Varrock blinked his nictitating membranes in confusion. What? Is there any precedent for a challenge involving engineering skills? The Dendarian considered this. The Krell-Torah, a battle of creation, hasn't been invoked in centuries, but it is permitted. A plan began forming in Dominic's mind. He felt a flicker of curiosity that wasn't his own, Nistra, sensing his thoughts through their strengthening bond. When Dominic stepped onto the arena platform, Zeklath was already waiting, his massive form adorned with ceremonial armor. High Counselor Thryax, Nistra's father, presided over the ceremony from an elevated position, his ancient face unreadable. The challenge has been issued and accepted, Thryax announced, his voice carrying across the hushed crowd. Zeklath of House Voroth challenges the validity of the binding between Nistra of House Thryax and the human Dominic Foster. Zeklath's patterns pulsed with aggressive confidence. I invoke my right to reclaim what was meant to be mine. Admiral Harlow, standing with the human delegation, looked deeply concerned. Dominic caught his eye and gave a slight nod. The Admiral had made it clear. This incident had implications far beyond one maintenance technician's predicament. As the challenged, Thryax continued, Dominic Foster has the right to select the form of combat. All eyes turned to Dominic. He took a deep breath, feeling Nistra's presence in his mind, not controlling but supporting. I choose Krell-Torah, he announced, the battle of creation. Murmurs erupted among the Xyrelians. Zeklath's patterns rippled with surprise before settling into something darker. An ancient choice, Thryax acknowledged. Each combatant will receive identical resources and must create a device that embodies the strength of their claim. The superior creation wins. Dominic felt rather than saw Nistra's approval washing through their bond. 3 hours later, Dominic stared at the components spread before him. The Krell-Torah had provided both combatants with an identical array of parts, some familiar, others clearly Xyrelian in origin. Across the arena, Zeklath worked confidently, assembling what appeared to be a weapon of some kind. Typical of the warrior caste, focusing on destruction rather than creation. Dominic closed his eyes, letting his engineer's mind analyze the problem. The winning creation needed to embody the strength of his claim to Nistra. But what was that claim? He hadn't chosen this binding, had stumbled into it by accident. Yet, he felt Nistra's presence in his mind, curious, hopeful. The connection between them had grown stronger by the hour, surprisingly comforting rather than intrusive. Through it, he'd glimpsed fragments of her life, her hopes for her people, her quiet rebellion against traditions that no longer served their purpose. Dominic opened his eyes with sudden clarity. He began assembling components with the sure hands of someone who had spent his life fixing broken systems. As the final minutes ticked away, Zeklath completed his creation, an impressive energy weapon that hummed with power. The crowd murmured appreciatively at the craftsmanship. When Dominic stepped forward with his creation, confused whispers spread through the audience. His device was smaller, simpler in appearance, a crystalline sphere housing intricate circuitry with two handprints molded into its surface. "Explain your creation," Thryax commanded Zeklath first. The warrior hefted his weapon. "I have created the Fist of Zalthorin, a weapon worthy of the warrior who will protect House Thryax and bring glory to our lineage." He demonstrated its power with a controlled burst of energy that left scorch marks on the arena floor. Thryax nodded, then turned to Dominic. "And you, human." Dominic held up his creation. "I call this the Bridge of Understanding. It doesn't destroy, it connects." He placed it on a pedestal between them. "This device creates a temporary neural bridge, similar to what naturally formed between Nistra and myself, but accessible to anyone who touches it. It allows two individuals to truly understand each other, beyond words or cultural barriers." The crowd fell silent. "A demonstration," Thryax said. Dominic looked directly at Zeklath. "I challenge you to place your hand on this device at the same time as me. Experience the bond I share with Nistra. Then judge whether your claim is stronger." For a moment, Zeklath hesitated. Then, with a defiant flare of his patterns, he stepped forward. "I will prove the weakness of your claim, human." They placed their hands on the device simultaneously. The sphere illuminated, casting rainbow patterns across their faces. Zeklath's expression changed immediately. Shock, then confusion, finally understanding. When they both removed their hands, the warrior's patterns had shifted to colors Dominic hadn't seen before. "I withdraw my challenge," Zeklath announced, his voice different somehow. "The binding between Nistra and the human is true." The arena erupted in astonished conversation. Thryax raised his hands for silence. "The challenge is resolved. The binding stands." He fixed Dominic with an evaluating gaze. "You have shown wisdom unusual for your species, Dominic Foster." Nistra stepped onto the platform, her patterns pulsing with emotions too complex for Dominic to fully interpret, though he felt their echo through their bond. "What did you show him?" she asked softly as she approached. "The truth," Dominic replied, "that I may not have chosen this binding initially, but I choose it now." She reached out, her six-fingered hand meeting his five-fingered one. "As do I." Admiral Harlow approached with High Counselor Thryax, both looking remarkably pleased. "It seems we have an unexpected opportunity for strengthening relations between our peoples," Harlow said, formal, but with a hint of approval Dominic had never heard directed at him before. "Indeed," Thryax agreed. "Perhaps there is wisdom in the ancient ways after all. The crystals chose well." As the diplomats moved away to discuss implications, Dominic turned back to Nistra. "I still don't understand why the crystals chose me of all people." Nistra's patterns shifted to a warm, intimate glow. "The right of Zalthorin doesn't seek perfect matches, Dominic. It seeks complementary souls, those who together create something greater than either could alone." Through their bond, Dominic felt the truth of her words. What had begun as an accident, a human maintenance technician simply looking for his missing tool, had somehow become the foundation for something much more significant. "So," he said with a small smile, "what exactly does a human Zyrelian wedding reception look like?" Nistra's patterns rippled with amusement. "I believe that is something we will create together, my life mate." And for the first time since falling through that maintenance duct, Dominic Foster felt like maybe, just maybe, Breaking his first rule of survival on Nexus 7 had been the best mistake he'd ever made.